A mansion where guests disappear from locked rooms, where an entire floor exists but can't be reached, where everyone who stays has the same nightmare-endless corridors. It's a woman's impossible smile and a voice saying, "You're part of the collection now in 2023. Someone filmed what's really in the sealed basement. What they found explains every disappearance, every nightmare, every death since 1924. This is the true dark story of Mar-a-Lago. And I'm warning you now, some of you watching, and this will start having the dreams tonight." In the winter of 1924, Marjorie Merriweather Post sat across from Joseph Urban in his Manhattan office, spreading dozens of intricate drawings across his mahogany desk. She was one of the wealthiest women in America, heiress to the Post serial fortune, and she had come to Urban with an unusual request. She wanted him to design a mansion in Palm Beach, Florida winter retreat that would become her masterpiece. Urban was accustomed to wealthy clients with grand visions. As a prominent architect and scenic designer, he'd worked on opera houses and luxury estates. But as he examined Marjorie's sketches, something made his hands go cold. These weren't the amateur drawings of a dreaming socialite. They were professionally detailed architectural renderings, showing a sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion with 128 rooms, precise measurements and structural specifications that would challenge even experienced architects. "Where did you learn to draft like this?" Urban asked, unable to hide his surprise. Marjorie's response chilled him. "I didn't draw these while awake, Mr. Urban. I've been having the same dream for 3 years. Every night I walk through this house. I know every room, every corridor, every window. When I wake up, I simply remember what I saw and put it on paper." Urban tried to laugh it off as an impressive artistic exercise, but Marjorie wasn't finished. She pulled out a final sketcher, detailed floor plan of what appeared to be an ancient Spanish monastery. "This is what I see beneath the house in my dreams," she said quietly. "The foundation, a bones of something that came before." Urban's assistant, a young man named Thomas Whitmore, happened to be a history enthusiast. He studied the drawing for several minutes, his face growing increasingly pale. Finally, he excused himself and returned with a dusty architectural journal from the office library. Inside was a brief mention of the Monasterio de las Almas Perdidas, the Monastery of Lost Souls, a Spanish structure that had burned to the ground in 1582 during a mysterious fire that killed all 47 monks inside. According to the historical account, the monks had been engaged in what the Spanish Inquisition called spiritual experiments, attempting to create a place where the barrier between the living world and whatever lay beyond was thinnest. The journal contained no drawings or floor plans. The monastery's architectural details had been deliberately destroyed by the Inquisition, erased from all official records. Yet Marjorie's sketch matched the written descriptions perfectly, down to the circular meditation chamber and the unusual catacombs beneath. "How did you know about this?" Whitmore whispered. Marjorie looked at him with an expression that Urban would later describe as not quite her own. "I told you. They show me in my dreams. It's the ones who live there. They've been waiting for someone to rebuild it properly, in a place where the walls between worlds are already weak. Palm Beach is perfect, the convergence of water and land, the tropical storms that charge the air with energy. They've been guiding me to the right location." Urban should have refused the commission then. Every instinct told him to walk away. But Marjorie offered him an extraordinary sum, and he convinced himself that she was simply an eccentric heiress with too much money and an overactive imagination. Construction began in March 1925. Within the first month, 3 workers died under circumstances that defied explanation. The first, a stonemason named Albert Briggs, was found in the unfinished ballroom, dead with no marks on his body. His face was frozen in a scream, eyes wide and glassy, staring at something no one else could see. The second death occurred in the North Tawara. Carpenter named James Sullivan fell from scaffolding, but witnesses swore they heard him shouting, "Get off me, let go," though he was completely alone. The third victim, a young electrician named Antonio Reyes, was discovered in the basement excavation, clutching a rosary. Dead from what the coroner reluctantly listed as acute cardiac arrest brought on by extreme fear, the workers began to whisper. They claimed to hear voices in the walls, speaking in Spanish prayers or warnings. They couldn't tell which. Tools would vanish from locked boxes and appear in impossible places, embedded in concrete that had been poured the day before, or inside sealed walls. Morning's workers arrived to find their previous day's work undone, but rearranged in ways that matched Marjorie's dream drawings more precisely than their own professional blueprints had indicated. Joseph Urban visited the construction site less and less frequently. In his private journal, discovered years after his death, he wrote a single haunting entry dated November 1926. "I have built something that should not exist." Marjorie walks through the unfinished rooms as though she is coming home to a place she has lived for centuries. Sometimes I see her lips moving, holding conversations with empty air, and God help me. Sometimes I hear responses, whispers in Spanish, coming from nowhere, agreeing with her. Whatever we're building, we're not building it for her. We're rebuilding it for something that's been waiting a very long time to have a body made of stone and marble, placed to anchor itself to our world. Mar-a-Lago was completed in 1927. Marjorie moved in immediately, filling it with treasures from around the world. But Urban never set foot inside the finished mansion. He died in 1933, and his last words to his wife were reportedly, "Tell Marjorie I'm sorry." Gave it a face, and now it can see us all. The mansion stood on its Palm Beach island, waves crashing against its walls, waiting for its true purpose to unfold. Marjorie Merriweather Post was known throughout high society as a refined collector with impeccable taste. Her guests marveled at the Spanish tiles imported piece by piece from a Seville palace, the Venetian glass chandeliers, the tapestries that once hung in European castles. But these public treasures were merely decoration compared to what she kept hidden in the basement of Mar-a-Lago. In a windowless room she called the archive, her personal secretary, a woman named Eleanor Hartwick, maintained meticulous records of Marjorie's daily activities. Her private journals, discovered in a Connecticut estate sale in 1998, revealed disturbing details about her employer's obsession with objects that had witnessed death. Eleanor wrote that Marjorie would spend hours, sometimes entire afternoons, locked in the archive, and that she could hear her employer's voice through the heavy oak door, speaking in animated conversation. But whenever Eleanor knocked and entered, she always found Marjorie completely alone. "Mrs. Post insists she is merely cataloging her collection," Eleanor wrote in March 1932. "But I've heard two distinct voices through that door, hers, and another, deeper, speaking in a language I don't recognize." When I mentioned this, she smiled and said, "The objects remember their past lives, Eleanor. If you listen carefully, they'll tell you their stories." I don't believe she's speaking metaphorically. The archive itself was a chamber of horrors disguised as a museum. Marjorie had acquired funeral masks from a dozen different cultures: Egyptian, pre-Columbian, West African, Tibetan. Each one had been worn by corpses during burial rites, meant to protect or guide the dead through the afterlife. She displayed them on the walls in a careful arrangement that Eleanor noted formed patterns that hurt to look at too long, as though the negative spaces between the masks were trying to spell something. The centerpiece of the collection was a full-length mirror in an ornate silver frame, recovered from the wreck of a merchant ship that had vanished in the Bermuda Triangle in 1878. All 37 crew members had disappeared without a trace. Though the ship itself was found intact, drifting with its cargo untouched, the mirror had been in the captain's quarters. Marjorie told guests that it was special, that if you looked into it at the right time of day, you wouldn't see your own reflection, but rather what you're meant to become. Eleanor confessed in her journal that she'd looked into the mirror once accidentally while cleaning. "I saw myself," she wrote, "but older, impossibly older, dressed in clothes from a different era entirely. And behind my reflection stood dozens of figures I couldn't quite make out, all watching me with what felt like hungry anticipation. I haven't been able to sleep properly since. I see those figures in my peripheral vision now, even when I'm nowhere near that terrible room." The paintings Marjorie collected were equally disturbing. She sought out portraits of people who had died violently, or mysteriously a French nobleman guillotined during the Revolution, a Victorian child who'd drowned in a well, a Spanish duchess who'd been poisoned by her husband. She paid premium prices for these works, often outbidding museums. When asked why she wanted such morbid pieces, she explained, "Their eyes hold the moment of transition. That instant when they realized they were leaving life behind, that knowledge is captured in the paint, if the artist was talented enough. These people are still there, still experiencing that eternal moment of understanding." Guests who ventured into the archive reported an overwhelming sensation of being watched. Multiple visitors independently described the same phenomenon, no matter where they stood in the room. Every painted face seemed to track their movement. A senator who toured the collection in 1935 left after only 5 minutes, visibly shaken. He later told his wife that one of the portraits, a young woman in an Edwardian dress, had smiled at him, though he'd been looking directly at it and seen the expression change. But Marjorie's most disturbing claim involved the knowledge she gained from her collection. At dinner parties, she would casually reveal intimate details about historical figures that had never been publicly recorded. She described the final thoughts of a Tudor lord whose portrait she owned, recounting his regret over betraying his brother, betrayal that historians only confirmed decades later through newly discovered letters. She knew the real name of a woman in a 17th-century painting whose identity had been deliberately obscured by the artist. When researchers finally authenticated the subject through X-ray analysis in the 1960s, they found Marjorie had been correct. "How do you know these things?" a curator from the Smithsonian asked her during a private viewing in 1938. Marjorie ran her fingers along the frame of a painting, a Spanish monk with hollow, haunted eyes. "They tell me," she said simply. "When you give them a proper home, when you listen with the right kind of attention, the dead are remarkably forthcoming. They're lonely, you see. They've been silent for so long. They're grateful to finally have someone who can hear them." Eleanor recorded an incident from October 1943 that finally convinced her something deeply wrong was happening. She had entered the archive to deliver a message and found Marjorie standing before the mirror. Speaking in fluent Spanish, a language Eleanor knew her employer had never studied. Marjorie was having an animated conversation, pausing as though listening to responses, nodding, sometimes laughing. When she finally noticed Eleanor, she switched back to English without missing a beat. "I was just discussing the renovation plans with the previous owners," Marjorie said casually. "They have some excellent suggestions about the foundation." "Mrs. Post," Eleanor replied carefully. "This house has never had previous owners. You built it." Marjorie's smile was serene but chilling. "Not this house, Eleanor. It's the one that was here before. The one that's always been here, just on the other side of the walls. They've been waiting centuries for someone to rebuild it properly, and they're so very pleased with my work." By 1950, Marjorie stopped sleeping in the main mansion entirely. She had a guest house constructed on the property and spent her nights there instead, only entering Mar-a-Lago during daylight hours. Eleanor asked her once tentatively if something had frightened her. "Not frightened," Marjorie replied, staring at the mansion from her guest house window. "It's just that at night the collection becomes too active, too demanding. They all want my attention at once, and there are so many of them now, so many voices all speaking at the same time. It's exhausting, Eleanor. Sometimes I think they're not telling me stories about the past anymore. Sometimes I think they're making plans for the future. And I'm not certain I'm ready to hear what they have in mind." She never explained further. But Eleanor noticed that Marjorie had begun locking the archive with 3 separate keys, each one kept in a different location, as though she were trying to keep something in, rather than keeping people out. When Marjorie Merriweather Post died in September 1973, her will contained specific instructions. Mar-a-Lago was to be donated to the United States government as a retreat for presidents and visiting foreign dignitaries. It seemed like a generous gift from a patriotic heiress. But what happened in the weeks following her death suggested the government had been waiting for this transfer for reasons that had nothing to do with diplomacy. Before the official donation could be processed, before any public announcement was made, a team of federal agents arrived at Mar-a-Lago. They came in unmarked vehicles at dawn on October 3, 1973. With authorizations signed by officials whose names were redacted from all later documents, the estate's caretaker staff were told to leave the premises immediately and not return for 3 weeks. No explanation was provided. Local Palm Beach police were instructed to maintain a perimeter around the property. Officer David Morrison, who was assigned to the detail, later told his daughter that the operation felt more like a containment than an investigation. No one was allowed in or out. Delivery trucks were turned away. Even the landscaping crew was denied entry. At night, Morrison said, you could see lights moving through the mansion at odd hours, occasionally hear sounds that he described as heavy objects being dragged across floors. The team spent 21 days inside Mar-a-Lago, focusing their attention on the basement archive. Contractors were brought in to remove walls, shore up foundations, and create new sealed chambers. Unmarked trucks left the property in the middle of the night, their cargo carefully wrapped and loaded under armed supervision. The official inventory listed the removed items as historical artifacts of cultural significance, but no museum or government facility ever reported receiving them. What the agents found remained classified for decades. The operation was buried under layers of bureaucratic paperwork, stamped with security classifications that ensured no one would ask questions. The 12 agents involved were reassigned to different departments across the country. Prohibited from contacting each other, bound by non-disclosure agreements that extended beyond their deaths. 43 years later, in 2016, one of those agents finally broke his silence. James Garrett was dying of pancreatic cancer in a Colorado hospice. His daughter sat by his bedside as he struggled to speak, insisting he needed to tell someone what he'd seen before it was too late. She recorded his confession on her phone, never imagining how disturbing it would be. Garrett described finding Marjorie's archive largely as Eleanor Hartwick had documented at the funeral masks. The cursed mirror, the paintings with eyes that watched. But there was more. Behind the archive, accessible through what appeared to be a solid brick wall, the agents discovered a hidden room that wasn't on any floor plan, any blueprint, or any architectural survey of the property. "We found the entrance by accident," Garrett whispered, his voice barely audible on the recording. One of the guys leaned against the wall and it just shifted. Moved inward like a door, even though there was no visible seam, no hinges, nothing. Inside was a circular chamber, maybe 20 feet across. The walls were covered in writing, thousands and thousands of words carved directly into the stone. The writing was in multiple languages: Spanish, Latin, English, and others the agents couldn't identify. But more disturbing than the writing itself was what it contained: journals. Dozens of leather-bound journals stacked on stone shelves, each one filled with Marjorie's distinctive handwriting. "We started reading them," Garrett continued. His breathing labored. "That's when things stopped making sense." The journals were dated. The oldest one we found was from 1847. Marjorie wasn't born until 1887. These journals were written 40 years before she existed. The entries were written in first person, describing events from the 19th century in intimate detail. They documented daily life in various locations: a plantation in South Carolina, a boarding house in New York, a hacienda in Mexico. Different locations, different time periods, but all in Marjorie's handwriting, all in her voice. The author described watching the construction of buildings that were completed decades before Marjorie's birth, attending events that were documented historical facts. One entry described witnessing Lincoln's assassination from the balcony at Ford's Theater, Garrett said. She wrote about the smell of gunpowder, the screaming, the chaos. She described details that weren't in any newspaper: the pattern on Mary Todd Lincoln's dress, the exact words a doctor said when he reached the president. We had a historian verify it later, secretly. Everything was accurate. Things no one could have known unless they were actually there, but the journals documented. Something else: a progression. Each one showed the author becoming more aware, more intentional. The early entries read like confused memories, fragments of experiences the writer didn't fully understand. The later entries, those dated in the early 1900s, showed purpose. The author described searching for something, following what she called the thin places, locations where the barrier between worlds was weakest. The final journal, dated 1923, contained only a dozen entries. Garrett remembered the last one word for word, because it had been circled in red ink. Underlined 3 times. "I found where I need to build it. Palm Beach, Florida. The convergence point. The place where the walls are thinnest, where the ocean meets the land, where storms charge the air with energy. I can finally come back properly, not just borrowing bodies, not just fragments of consciousness spreading across generations. This time I'll build myself a permanent home, a place anchored in stone and memory, where I can gather the others, where we can finally stop wandering and start existing fully again. Construction begins next year." "We didn't understand what it meant," Garrett admitted. "Not at first." But then one of the guys found another journal, hidden behind the others. This one was different. It wasn't dated. It was written in that same Spanish we'd seen in the wall carvings, the same Spanish from those monks who burned in 1582. The journal described the monastery's final experiment and attempt to transcend death by anchoring consciousness to physical locations, creating permanent vessels for souls to inhabit. The monks believed they had succeeded in the moments before the fire, that they had achieved what they called Distributed existence, spreading their awareness across the fabric of reality, waiting for the right person in the right place to give them a way back. The last page of that journal, Garrett said, tears streaming down his weathered face, had a list of names. 47 names. The 47 monks who died in the fire. And at the bottom, written in English in Marjorie's handwriting, it said, "The collection is nearly complete. 46 have found their way back. I am the last. And now, I have built us a home that will stand for centuries." The agents sealed the hidden chamber that day. They removed everything, the journals, the artifacts, the writings on the walls. They brought in specialists who filled the circular room with concrete, then built a new wall in front of where the entrance had been. They did it quickly, working through the night, as though afraid something might try to stop them. "We were ordered never to speak about it," Garrett said. "Threatened with prosecution, with prison? But I need someone to know. That house, it's not just a building. It was built with purpose, by something that's been planning for centuries. And I don't think we stopped anything. I think we just delayed it, made it angry." Garrett died 6 hours after recording that confession. His daughter Sarah tried to share the recording with journalists, but no mainstream outlet would touch it. It circulated on obscure forums and conspiracy websites, dismissed as the ravings of a dying man's morphine-addled mind. But Sarah included one final detail that never made it into the widely shared version. Before her father lost consciousness for the last time, he grabbed her hand and whispered, "We left one journal behind. We couldn't find it." That circular room, it was bigger on the inside than the outside. Possible, but true. And in that impossible space, something was hiding from us, waiting for us to leave. Whatever it was, it's still there, still in the house. It has all of Marjorie's memories. The government officially declined Marjorie's donation in 1981, citing maintenance costs. Mar-a-Lago was returned to private ownership. The official reason seemed mundane, bureaucratic, but those who knew the truth understood. They hadn't rejected a mansion. They'd refused to take responsibility for something they couldn't control, something they'd failed to contain, something that was exactly where it wanted to be. Between 1973 and 1985, Mar-a-Lago existed in a state of suspended animation. After the government declined the donation, the mansion sat mostly empty, maintained by a skeleton crew of caretakers who were paid generously to keep the estate from falling into disrepair. It was during these 12 years that the property's true nature began to reveal itself. No longer masked by the social events and constant human presence that had defined the Marjorie Post era, caretakers never more than 6 at a time developed an unspoken rule within the first month. Never enter the mansion after dark alone. It wasn't an official policy. No one wrote it down or discussed it during staff meetings. But every person who worked there understood it instinctively, the way animals understand to avoid certain territories. Robert Chen was the head of security from 1979 to 1984, a former Marine with 2 tours in Vietnam. Chen wasn't a man who scared easily, but Mar-a-Lago unsettled him in ways combat never had. He kept a detailed personal log, writing entries in a series of notebooks that his widow donated to a local historical society after his death in 2003. Those notebooks painted a picture of a house that was fundamentally wrong. November 12, 1979, Chen wrote, "Locked all exterior doors at 8 p.m. as usual, made my rounds. Everything's secure." At 11:47 p.m., motion sensors triggered in the gold ballroom. Checked the cameras, nothing visible, but all 3 doors to that room were standing wide open. I know I locked them. Check each one twice. Found them open. Lights on inside, though I'd turned them all off hours earlier. The smell in that room, like flowers rotting in water, locked everything again. We'll request backup for night shifts. But backup didn't help. Chen's log documented incident after incident. Lights turning on and off in sequences that, when mapped out, spelled words in Morse code. The first time it happened, Chen thought he was imagining patterns and randomness. But he started recording the sequences, translating them. The messages were brief, repetitive, always the same. Still here, waiting, almost ready. The smell was a constant problem. Different rooms would suddenly reek of burning wood despite having no fireplaces. The odor would last for hours, then vanish completely, leaving no source, no explanation. Chen had the chimneys inspected, the electrical systems examined for shorts or overheating. Nothing was ever found wrong. Then there was what Chen called the watching presence. He described it in multiple entries, always struggling to find adequate words. "It's not like being watched by a person," he wrote. On January 8, 1980, "It's like the house itself has eyes. You feel it most strongly in the hallways after sunset. The air gets heavier, thicker, like moving through water. And you absolutely know that something is observing you. Not with hostility exactly. More like curiosity or hunger. The way you might watch an insect walking across your kitchen counter, deciding whether to crush it or let it live." Chen wasn't the only one who felt it. Maria Ortiz, one of the housekeepers during this period, told her family that the mansion was digesting memories. She described finding rooms that seemed to shift their layout slightly between visits, a window that should be on the east wall appearing on the south, furniture rearranged in ways that made no logical sense but felt somehow more correct, more intentional. "The house is remembering how it wants to be," Maria told her daughter. "It's like it has an opinion about its own architecture." But the most frequently documented phenomenon was the woman. Multiple staff members reported seeing her, though never clearly. She appeared as a figure in outdated clothing, 1920s style, with long skirts and high collars, standing at windows, visible only in peripheral vision. The moment anyone looked directly at her, she vanished. Chen estimated he saw her at least 30 times during his 5 years at the property. March 3, 1981, his log read, "Saw the woman again. 3rd floor, east wing, standing at the window overlooking the ocean. She was there for maybe 10 seconds before I turned my head. Gone instantly. But this time I noticed something. The window she was standing at doesn't face the ocean, faces an interior courtyard. But while she was there, I could see ocean waves through that glass. Like the window was showing a different view or a different time. Checked the window after she vanished. Just shows the courtyard like always." The woman appeared most frequently in or near the room where Marjorie's archive had been. Even though the government agents had gutted that space, even though it now sat empty with bare concrete walls, staff avoided it. Chen wrote that the emptiness somehow made it worse, like walking into a stomach that's still digesting its last meal, even though you can't see what it ate. In March 1982, Chen started documenting another pattern. Doors throughout the mansion would be found unlocked in the morning, despite his meticulous nightly routine of securing every entrance. At first, it was only 1 or 2 doors. By August, it was spreading 5 doors, then 10, then 20. Chen began marking the locks with small pieces of tape, trying to determine if someone was physically unlocking them or if the mechanisms were failing. The tape was never disturbed. The locks simply opened themselves. September 19, 1982, Chen's log recorded, 37 doors unlocked this morning. I'm going to start sleeping in the security office. Need to catch this happening in real time. He never did. The doors opened silently, leaving no evidence, no recorded motion on the cameras. The only clue was the timing. It always happened between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m., during what Chen called the dead hour. The breaking point came on the morning of March 15, 1984. Chen arrived for his shift at 6 a.m. to relieve the night guard, who looked pale and shaken, but refused to explain why. Chen began his morning rounds and immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong. Every door in Mar-a-Lago 128 rooms was standing open. Every single one. Exterior doors, interior doors, closets, storage rooms, even the door to the sealed basement archive. The night guard admitted he'd locked everything at midnight as protocol demanded. Chen checked the security footage. At 3:17 a.m. exactly, every door in the building swung open simultaneously, the cameras recording it in real time. It moved slowly, deliberately, as though pushed by invisible hands that were savoring the moment. But that wasn't what made Chen quit. In each of those 128 rooms, placed precisely in the geometric center of the floor, was a single black rose, fresh cut, still dripping water, thorns intact. No florist in Palm Beach or anywhere in South Florida had received an order for black roses. They were difficult to obtain, expensive, requiring special dye treatments. Someone would have needed to special order 128 of them weeks in advance. Chen walked through every room, documenting the roses with his camera. In his log, he described the experience. Each rose was identical. Same length stem, same stage of bloom, same droplet of water on the same petal. Not similar, identical. Like they were all copies of a single flower, or all snapshots of the same flower in the same moment. And the smell, they didn't smell like roses. They smelled like the incense I'd encountered in the basement, that mixture of sandalwood and something else, something organic and wrong. In the old archive room, Chen found something that made him drop his camera. The rose there was different. It was white, not black, and underneath it, carved into the new concrete floor, were words in Spanish: La colección está completa. Ahora podemos despertar completamente. His hands shaking, Chen translated it roughly. The collection is complete. Now we can fully awaken. He submitted his resignation that afternoon. In his final log entry, dated March 15, 1984, he wrote, "I've seen combat. I've seen men die. I've seen things in war that would break most people. But I've never felt hunted before. Not like this. That house isn't empty. It's full. Full of something that's been waiting, planning, growing stronger. Those roses were a message, not a threat and announcement. But whatever's in there is done, being subtle. It's ready for the next phase. And I'm not staying to find out what that means." The estate management company struggled to find replacement security staff. The night guard who'd been on duty during the Rose incident had checked himself into a psychiatric facility. Repeating the same phrase over and over, they all opened at once. Every door, like the house was taking a breath, like it was breathing us in. Mar-a-Lago sat with minimal staff for the next year, till Donald Trump purchased it in 1985. The caretakers who remained during that final year reported that the mansion seemed to be waiting. The incidents decreased in frequency, but increased in intensity. Fewer events, but more dramatic. Shadows that moved against the light source. Voices speaking in crowded whispers from empty rooms. The persistent smell of burning wood and incense. And through it all, the woman at the windows kept appearing, more frequently now, more solid. Staff reported that she no longer vanished when looked at directly. Instead, she would turn slowly to face whoever was watching her, her expression serene and patient. Maria Ortiz, in her final week before the property changed hands, described seeing the woman standing in the main foyer one evening at dusk. For the first time, she saw her face clearly. It was Marjorie Merriweather Post, but wrong. Younger than Marjorie had been in any photographs, but with eyes that looked ancient, knowing, hungry. She smiled at me. Maria told her daughter. She said in perfect Spanish, "Tell the new owner I've prepared everything for his arrival. The house has been waiting for someone with his particular ambitions. He'll do nicely." When Maria turned to run, she heard Marjorie's voice one last time. Echoing through the empty mansion, the collection needed one more piece. Someone who would never leave. Someone who would make the house important again, fill it with people and attention and energy. Someone who would feed us for decades. And he's coming. Mar-a-Lago's silent years were ending. The house had been patient, gathering strength in the darkness. Now it was ready for its next chapter, ready for the man who would make it the center of attention once more, ready to feast. Donald Trump purchased Mar-a-Lago in December 1985 for approximately $10 million, acquiring both the mansion and its surrounding acreage. He saw it as a trophy property, a symbol of prestige and power that would cement his status among Palm Beach's elite. What he didn't know, what the sellers never disclosed, was that he'd purchased something that had been waiting specifically for someone like him. Renovations began immediately. Trump had ambitious plans to transform Mar-a-Lago into a private club, and that meant extensive work throughout the property. He hired prestigious contractors, spent millions on upgrades, and treated the project with the same aggressive confidence he brought to all his developments. But from the first day, his workers encountered problems that defied conventional explanation. Miguel Santos, a master carpenter from Miami, led one of the construction crews. In interviews years later, he described the job as the strangest 6 months of my career. Tools disappeared, constantly not stolen, but vanished. A drill would be set down for 30 seconds, and when the worker reached for it again, it would be gone. Sometimes these tools would reappear days later in impossible locations. "We found a hammer inside a sealed wall," Santos recalled. "We'd drywalled that section 2 days earlier." "No, because I did it myself." But when we had to open it again to run new electrical, there was Jimmy's hammer, sitting on a stud in the middle of the wall. No holes, no damage, just sitting there, like it had always been there. Nice. Jimmy swore he'd lost that hammer in the garden, nowhere near that wall. The incidents escalated. Workers reported sudden temperature drops, the kind of cold that came in waves, like walking through invisible pockets of winter air in the middle of Florida heat. One crew working on the third floor described the sensation of invisible hands pushing them from behind as they climbed ladders or descended stairs. 3 different men fell in separate incidents, all describing the exact same experience. The feeling of fingers pressing firmly against their backs, shoving them forward. I felt it clear as day, electrician Tom Brewster told his supervisor. 2 hands, palms flat against my shoulder blades, pushing hard. I grabbed the railing and spun around, ready to punch whoever was screwing with me. Nobody there, not a soul. But I felt those hands. The basement became the epicenter of strangeness. Trump's plans included renovating the old archive room, converting it into additional storage space for the club. When contractors broke through the outer wall, they discovered something the government agents had supposedly cleared out over a decade earlier. Marjorie's collection was back. Every item that had been documented in Eleanor Hartwick's journals was present and accounted for. The funeral masks lined the walls in their original arrangement. The cursed mirror stood in its ornate silver frame, reflecting the room in a way that seemed slightly off, angles that didn't quite match, shadows falling in wrong directions. The paintings hung in their designated spots, eyes following movement with unsettling precision. One contractor, a young man named David Chinno, relation to Robert, made the mistake of photographing the room with his personal camera. He was documenting the work for his portfolio, taking before and after shots. When he got the film developed at a local shop, the technician called him back, refusing to complete the order until David explained what kind of sick joke he was playing. The photograph showed the archive room filled with transparent figures. Dozens of them, maybe 40 or 50, standing among the artifacts, all facing the camera with expressions of intense focus. They were translucent enough to see through, but detailed enough to make out faces, clothing from different eras, hands reaching toward the lens. In the foreground, clearest of all, stood a woman in 1920s dress Marjorie Merriweather Post, younger than her final years, smiling with an expression that managed to convey both welcome and warning. David never returned to Mar-a-Lago. He left the photograph with the technician, who kept it in a drawer for years before eventually throwing it away, unable to shake the feeling that the figures in the image were somehow aware of being observed. The construction supervisor reported the basement situation to Trump's project manager, expecting shock or concern. Instead, he was told to seal the room immediately. Don't inventory it, don't touch anything, just close it up. The order came from high up the chain, possibly from Trump himself, though this was never confirmed. A specialized crew was brought in from out of state. They arrived at midnight, worked through the night, and were gone by dawn. Local workers weren't told who these men were or who employed them. They wore no identifying uniforms, drove unmarked vehicles, and spoke to no one except their own team leader. They sealed the archive room with steel-reinforced concrete, working with the kind of speed and efficiency that suggested they'd had done exactly this type of job before. The out-of-state crew worked in complete silence. Night security guard Paul Morrison watched them on the monitors and described their behavior as military, almost ritualistic. They worked in pairs, constantly checking measurements, consulting papers covered in diagrams that looked less like construction plans and more like geometric symbols. One pair spent over an hour arranging what appeared to be iron rods in a specific pattern within the concrete before it was poured. It looked like they were building a cage, Morrison told his replacement years later. Not just sealing a room, but imprisoning something inside it. Before the concrete fully set, the team leader placed something in the center of the wet mixture, small object wrapped in cloth. Morrison couldn't see what it was, but he heard the man speaking in Latin, reciting what sounded like a prayer or incantation. When the concrete was smoothed and finished, the entire crew left without cleaning their tools or collecting payment. They simply packed up and drove away. The workers who'd been hired locally were required to sign expanded non-disclosure agreements the next morning. The agreements were unusual in their specificity. They could undiscuss what they'd seen in the basement, couldn't describe the out-of-state crew, couldn't mention any unusual occurrences that happened during the renovation. The penalty for violation was listed as legal action up to and including criminal prosecution, language that seemed extreme for a standard construction project. Despite sealing the archive, incidents continued throughout the property. Painters working in the gold ballroom heard music big band-era songs playing faintly, as though from an old radio. But there was no radio, no speakers, no electrical source. The music would swell for a few moments, then fade away. One painter swore he heard conversation and laughter mixed in with the music, the sounds of a party that wasn't happening. It was like listening to an event from another time, he said. Like the walls remembered when this room was full of people, and they were replaying the memory. The most disturbing incident involved the mirrors. Mar-a-Lago had dozens of them ornate antiques, some original to Marjorie's era. Workers began noticing that reflections didn't always behave correctly. You'd catch movement in a mirror's surface, but when you turned, nothing would be there. Or you'd see yourself reflected, but just for a moment, you'd look different older. Or wearing clothes you'd never owned, or standing in a version of the room that had different furniture, different wallpaper. A young intern named Sarah Webb was walking through the main hallway when she glanced at a large mirror and stopped dead. Her reflection was normal, but behind her, the hallway was full of people, men and women in formal attire from various decades, all frozen in place, all staring directly at her through the glass. She spun around. The hallway was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, the figures were gone, but her reflection was smiling, a smile she wasn't making. Sarah quit that day. She later told friends that her reflection had mouthed words at her. Welcome home. By the time renovations wrapped up in 1986, Trump had spent over $3 million on Mar-a-Lago beyond the purchase price. The property was transformed into a luxurious private club, ready to host the elite and powerful. But 27 workers from the renovation crews had quit unexpectedly. Most offering vague excuses about other opportunities or family obligations. 5 had moved out of state immediately after leaving the job. Miguel Santos stayed until the project was complete, but he refused to work on any Trump properties afterward. That house changed during the renovation, he said. Like we woke something up by making noise, by breaking walls, by bringing in new energy. It started out cold and watchful. By the end, it felt hungry, eager, like it was excited about what came next. The sealed basement remained undisturbed, hidden behind new walls and under new flooring. The construction plans filed with the city didn't mention it. Officially, that space no longer existed. But night security staff reported hearing sounds from below, not footsteps or voices, but something else, a rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat, like something large, breathing slowly, patiently, waiting in the dark. Mar-a-Lago opened as a private club in 1995. Members paid hefty fees to access its restaurants, ballrooms, and guest rooms, unaware they were walking above something that had been deliberately imprisoned in concrete and steel. Something that had been building strength in darkness for over a decade. Something that had specifically wanted this transformation, this return to prominence and human presence. The house was no longer empty. It was finally full again, exactly as it had been designed to be, a place where the walls between worlds were thin, where the collection could feed on the energy of the living, or something that had been waiting since 1582 could continue its patient work toward whatever horrifying purpose it had always intended. And in the depths of that sealed basement, in the darkness behind concrete and iron, something smiled. In February 1997, Mar-a-Lago hosted a high-profile charity gala benefiting children's hospitals. Among the guests was Richard Whitmore, 42-year-old investment banker from Boston with no connection to Palm Beach beyond business acquaintances. He'd been invited by a client, accepted out of professional obligation, and booked one of the guest suites for the weekend. He checked in on Friday afternoon, attended the gala that evening, and was never seen again. The disappearance wasn't noticed immediately. Whitmore had told his wife he'd be staying through Sunday, taking advantage of the Florida weather to play golf and network. When he didn't return his wife's calls Friday night, she assumed he was tired from the event. Saturday's silence was more concerning, but she rationalized that he was enjoying his weekend. By Sunday evening, when he missed his flight and still hadn't called, she contacted the club. Mar-a-Lago staff checked his room, suite 347, a well-appointed space on the 3rd floor with ocean views. The room was undisturbed. His suitcase sat on the luggage rack, clothes neatly folded inside. His toiletries lined the bathroom counter. His wallet, containing $400 cash and all his credit cards, lay on the nightstand next to his watch and wedding ring. The bed hadn't been slept in. Nothing was missing except Richard Whitmore himself. Security footage told an impossible story. The cameras showed Whitmore returning from the gala at 11:47 p.m. Friday night. He walked down the third-floor hallway alone, slightly unsteady from champagne, humming to himself. He unlocked suite 347, entered, and closed the door behind him. The timestamp read 11 hours 47 minutes and 23 seconds p.m. The cameras recorded the hallway continuously through the night and all the next day. The door to suite 347 never opened. Not once. No one entered or exited. Yet when staff unlocked the room Sunday evening, Richard Whitmore was simply gone. The Palm Beach Police Department conducted an extensive investigation. They examined every window wall secured from the inside. They checked for hidden passages, loose panels, any architectural anomaly that might explain how someone could leave a locked room without opening the door. They found nothing. The room was on the third floor, with a 30-foot drop to landscaping below. No ladder marks, no disturbed bushes, no footprints in the soil. Detective Sarah Mendoza, lead investigator on the case, later described it as the most frustrating disappearance I've ever worked. They interviewed every staff member, every guest, everyone who'd attended the gala. No one had seen Whitmore after he entered that room. Cell phone was in his jacket pocket, in the closet turned off. His car remained in the parking lot, keys in his luggage. People don't just vanish from locked rooms, Mendoza told reporters. There's always an explanation, secret exits, accomplices, staging. But we found nothing. It was like he walked into that room and stepped out of reality. The case went cold within weeks. Richard Whitmore was declared a missing person, his disappearance attributed to unknown circumstances. His wife Jennifer refused to accept that answer. She hired private investigators, psychics, anyone who might provide closure. Nothing helped. Then, 3 months after Richard disappeared, Jennifer received a letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, postmarked from Palm Beach, with no return address. Inside was a single page written in her husband's distinctive handwriting. She'd seen it on birthday cards and anniversary notes for 15 years. There was no mistaking it. The letter read, "Jennifer, I don't know how to explain this so you'll believe me. I'm still in the room, suite 347. I'm here right now, writing this at the desk where I left my wallet. But the room isn't where you think it is anymore. It's somewhere else, somewhere wrong. I can see you when you come looking for me. I watched you walk down that hallway with the detective, saw you crying outside my door. I was screaming your name, pounding on the walls, but you couldn't hear me. It's like I'm behind glass, or in a different time, or I don't know. I don't understand what happened. When I came back from the gala, I felt dizzy. I thought it was the alcohol. Sat on the bed to take off my shoes, and the room started to change. The walls looked the same, but felt different, colder, heavier. I heard music playing, big band music from the 1940s, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Then I heard voices in the hallway. So many voices. Speaking different languages, laughing, crying, calling for help. I opened the door, but the hallway was wrong. It stretched on forever, doors multiplying in both directions, and there were people, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They were transparent, like fog shaped into human forms, and they all turned to look at me at once. One of them, a woman in an old-fashioned dress, smiled and said, "Welcome. We've been waiting for you." The collection grows. I tried to run back into my room, but when I turned around, the door had vanished. Just a wall where it should have been. I've been walking these hallways for days now, or maybe weeks. Time doesn't work right here. I see our world sometimes, like watching through a window. I see staff cleaning rooms that look familiar but slightly off. I see other guests sleeping in beds that exist in both places at once. And I'm not alone here. There are others. People who've gotten lost in this place. Some of them have been here for years. There's a woman named Margaret who says she's been trapped since 1952. A man named Thomas from the 1970s. Others who can barely remember their names anymore. They're fading. Jennifer. It's becoming more transparent, more like the fog people. And I can feel it happening to me too. The woman in the old dress, sigh, see her everywhere. She's always watching, always smiling that terrible smile. Sometimes she speaks to me. She says this place is called the Collection, that it's where the house keeps people who interest it. She says we're fuel or food or memories it's preserving. I don't understand, but I know I'm trapped here and I don't know how to get out. Don't let anyone else sleep in that room. Don't let them book suite 347. I can see it in both places, your world and this wrong version. Anyone who stays there is at risk of slipping through. Please, Jennifer. Make them close that room. Make them understand. I love you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I came here. I'm still in the room. I'm always in the room now. Richard Jennifer brought the letter to Detective Mendoza, who sent it to a handwriting analyst. The verdict was unambiguous. It was genuinely Richard Whitmore's handwriting. Not forged, not copied, written by his hand. The paper was standard hotel stationery, available in every Mar-a-Lago guest room. The postmark was authentic. Mendoza quietly requested that Suite 347 be taken out of rotation, citing ongoing investigation. The club's management was resistant until she showed them the letter. They agreed, but filed the request as maintenance issues rather than anything supernatural. The official explanation was that the room needed extensive renovation work, but the incidents didn't stop. Over the next 8 years, 3 more guests reported experiencing similar phenomena in different rooms. A businessman in Suite 219 woke at 3 a.m. to find his room shifted. Same furniture, same layout, but wrong somehow, with hallway sounds that didn't match any language he recognized. He ran from the room in his pajamas and refused to go back for his belongings. A couple in Suite 156 described waking to find transparent figures standing around their bed, watching them sleep. The figures didn't move or speak, just stared with expressions of profound longing. When the couple screamed, the figures faded, but both guests reported feeling lighter afterward, exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix, as though something vital had been drained from them. Most disturbing was the experience of Martha Hendricks, a retired teacher who stayed in Suite 402 in 2003. She reported losing 3 hours she could unaccount for. She remembered preparing for bed around 10 p.m., then suddenly found herself sitting at the room's desk at 1 a.m. Pen in her hand, having written 12 pages of text she didn't remember composing. The writing described the layout of a monastery, detailed instructions for a ritual in medieval Spanish, and a list of 47 names, the same names James Garrett had seen in that hidden basement journal years earlier. Martha didn't speak Spanish and had no knowledge of medieval religious practices. The handwriting was hers, verified by her own comparison to her daily journal. She checked out immediately, leaving the pages on the desk. Security found them the next morning. They were logged as lost and found, then mysteriously disappeared from the storage office 3 days later. Mar-a-Lago quietly removed 4 more rooms from their bookable inventory, citing various maintenance concerns. Staff began reporting consistent experiences in these closed rooms, the sound of someone moving around inside, trying doorknobs, whispering through keyholes. When security cameras were installed to monitor the empty suites, they captured nothing unusual. Yet staff members walking past these rooms at night swore they could hear breathing on the other side of the doors. Jennifer Whitmore never received another letter from her husband. She moved to Oregon, changed her name, and refused to ever discuss Mar-a-Lago again. But on the anniversary of Richard's disappearance each year, she received a single black rose by mail with no note, no return address, postmarked from Palm Beach. The roses arrived without fail for 27 years, until Jennifer's death in 2024. The final rose arrived 3 days after her funeral. It was delivered to her grave, placed carefully on the fresh earth by unknown hands. Discovered by the groundskeeper during his morning rounds. Inside the mansion, Suite 347 remains closed. The door is locked, officially undergoing permanent structural assessment. But night security staff report that sometimes, late at night, they hear knocking from inside that room. Slow, rhythmic, patient knocking. Not frantic or desperate, just persistent, as though whoever is inside knows they have all the time in the world. As though they're no longer asking to be let out. They're asking for company. In August 2004, Mar-a-Lago underwent a mandatory structural inspection required by Palm Beach County building codes. The club hired Harris and Associates, a prestigious architectural surveying firm from Miami, to conduct the assessment. Senior surveyor Michael Harrison assigned the job to one of his most meticulous employees, 34-year-old Daniel Kovacs, a licensed structural engineer with 12 years of experience and a reputation for obsessive attention to detail. Daniel approached the job with his characteristic thoroughness. He spent 3 days taking measurements, using laser rangefinders, traditional measuring tapes, and GPS-calibrated equipment to create a comprehensive 3-dimensional map of the property. He worked methodically through each floor, documenting ceiling heights, wall thicknesses, structural support locations, every physical detail that might be relevant to the building's integrity. On the fourth day, while compiling his data in his hotel room, Daniel noticed something that made his coffee go cold. The numbers didn't add up. Specifically, the vertical measurements were wrong. Mar-a-Lago's architectural plans filed with the county and maintained in official records since the building's construction in 1927 showed 3 main floors with attic space above. Daniel's measurements confirmed the 3 floors existed as documented. But when he calculated the total vertical distance from foundation to roofline, there was a discrepancy. 15 feet were missing. He'd checked his measurements 3 times, certain he'd made an error. The foundation to first floor measurement was correct, 12 feet. First floor to second floor, 14 feet. Second floor to third floor, 14 feet. Third floor to roof structure, 18 feet. Total, 58 feet. But his external measurement ground level to the peak of the roof reads 73 feet. Even accounting for foundation depth and roof construction, there should only be about 62 feet of vertical space. Instead, there were 73 feet. 11 feet more than could be accounted for by the documented floors. Daniel expanded his search, measuring the building from multiple angles using different methods. Every calculation confirmed the same impossible conclusion. Somewhere within Mar-a-Lago, a structure existed approximately 15 feet of vertical space that didn't correspond to any documented floor, any architectural plan, or any physical location he could access. He brought his findings to Michael Harrison, expecting his boss to identify some obvious oversight. Instead, Harrison studied the data for an hour in silence, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Finally, he told Daniel to write it up as a measurement anomaly, possibly due to complex roof architecture or unusual foundation work. Old mansions like this sometimes have quirky construction, Harrison said. Don't overthink it. But Daniel couldn't let it go. The discrepancy haunted him. Where was that space? What occupied those missing 15 feet? He began researching Mar-a-Lago's history, finding references to Joseph Urban's original designs, reading about Marjorie Merriweather Post's eccentric construction requests. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that the missing space was intentional, a floor that existed but had been deliberately hidden from all official documentation. Against his better judgment, Daniel returned to Mar-a-Lago after hours. He'd befriended one of the maintenance supervisors during his survey work and managed to get access to the building at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night, claiming he needed to verify a few measurements. Once inside, he brought equipment he'd never used on a standard survey, ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging cameras tools, designed to see through walls and detect hidden structures. Started on the 3rd floor, working his way through hallways, scanning ceilings and walls. For 2 hours, he found nothing unusual. Then, in the east wing, directly above what his plans indicated should be, Suite 347, his equipment picked up something extraordinary. The thermal imaging showed a heat signature above the ceiling, not the ambient temperature of attic space, but distinct thermal patterns suggesting enclosed rooms. The ground-penetrating radar confirmed it, approximately 12 to 15 feet above the 3rd floor ceiling. There were structures, walls, corridors. The radar even picked up what appeared to be furniture, distinct shapes that suggested beds, tables, chairs. Daniel stood in that hallway for 20 minutes, staring at his equipment readouts, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. There was an entire floor hidden between the 3rd floor and the roof, a floor that didn't appear on any blueprint, that had no visible access points, that existed in a space the building's official documentation claimed was empty attic. He expanded his scan, mapping the hidden floor as thoroughly as his equipment would allow. The layout was complex, at least 20 rooms, connected by hallways that seemed to mirror the 3rd floor below, but with subtle differences. Some rooms appeared larger than physically possible, given the building's external dimensions. The geometry didn't make sense, as though space itself folded differently in that hidden level. Most disturbing was what the thermal imaging revealed. Those heat signatures weren't just ambient warmth from the building, they moved. Slowly, deliberately, the warm spots shifted position across his screen, moving through the hidden corridors, entering and exiting rooms, gathering in certain locations as though congregating. Daniel's hands shook as he recorded the data, told himself it must be an equipment malfunction, hot water pipes creating false readings. But the patterns were too purposeful, too obviously deliberate. He watched one thermal signature move from a hidden room, travel down what his radar showed was a corridor, then stop at what appeared to be a door. It stayed there for several minutes as though waiting, then moved away. Heard something, then a sound from directly above him. Footsteps. Slow. M-A-S-U-R-E-D. Footsteps crossing the ceiling, moving in perfect synchronization with one of the thermal signatures on his screen. Daniel turned off his equipment and stood in absolute silence, listening. The footsteps continued, joined by others. Multiple sources of movement directly overhead in a space that officially didn't exist. Then came the voices. Muffled, distant, but unmistakable people speaking in hushed tones. He couldn't make out words, couldn't identify the language, but the rhythm of conversation was clear. People talking in the hidden floor above him, people moving through rooms that no one should be able to access. Daniel ran. He didn't pack up his equipment properly, didn't conduct any further measurements. He simply grabbed his laptop and fled the building, leaving expensive radar units and cameras behind. He drove straight to his hotel, packed his belongings, and checked out at 2 a.m. By dawn, he was back in Miami. He didn't file an official report with Harrison and Associates. Instead, he wrote everything in a personal document, saved it to a flash drive, and tried to return to his normal life.
How?
But the experience had changed something fundamental in his understanding of reality. He began obsessively researching Mar-a-Lago, collecting every piece of information he could find about its construction, its history, Marjorie Merriweather Post's occult interests. 3 weeks after his nighttime survey, Daniel returned to Palm Beach. He told no one, not his boss, not his wife, not his friends. He rented a car, bought new scanning equipment, and planned to conduct a more thorough investigation. He needed to understand what existed in that hidden floor, needed proof that would force someone to take this seriously. He entered Mar-a-Lago's grounds at midnight on a Tuesday, the same day of the week as his previous visit. Security footage shows him approaching the building at 12:17 a.m., carrying equipment bags. He's visible on 3 different cameras as he moves toward a side entrance near the east wing. At 12:23 a.m., Daniel stops walking. The footage shows him standing completely still, staring upward at the building's 3rd floor. His posture suggests he's seeing something, though the cameras capture nothing unusual in the direction of his gaze. He stands frozen for 47 seconds. Then, still staring upward, he slowly raises his right arm and waves a small, hesitant gesture, like someone greeting a familiar face. The footage shows him nod, as though responding to something someone said. He sets down his equipment bags, carefully, methodically, then walks toward the building. At 12:26 a.m., Daniel Kovacs walks directly into a solid wall, not a door, not an entrance, a flat section of external wall on the building's east side. The footage clearly shows him approaching the wall, placing both hands against the stone surface, and then simply continuing forward, his body seeming to merge with the solid structure. One moment he's there, hands pressed against stone. The next moment he's gone, absorbed into the wall as though it were liquid, leaving no trace. His equipment bags remained on the ground until morning, when groundskeepers discovered them and turned them over to security. Inside were the thermal imaging camera and radar unit from his previous visit equipment he'd supposedly abandoned 3 weeks earlier. But these weren't the originals. These were different models, newer versions he'd purchased specifically for this return trip. Someone had left his old equipment in the bags, equipment that should still be somewhere inside Mar-a-Lago from his first visit. The serial numbers matched, but Daniel had been carrying new equipment when he approached the building. The bags also contained a USB drive. Security reviewed it and immediately classified the contents. The footage on that drive showed thermal imaging of the hidden floor, timestamped at 12:20 a.m. on the night of Daniel's disappearance. Footage recorded minutes before he walked into the wall. The thermal signatures were everywhere, dozens of them, moving through the hidden corridors. And at 12:22 a.m., one of those signatures moves to a position that, based on the building's geometry, would place it directly on the other side of the external wall, where Daniel would disappear 4 minutes later. The signature stays there, waiting until Daniel's thermal image appears on the footage, approaching from outside. The 2 signatures meet at the wall, separated only by stone. Then Daniel's signature crosses through, passing from the outside world into the hidden floor in a way that should be physically impossible and joins the other signatures in that space between spaces. The final frame of footage, timestamped 12:27 a.m., Shows dozens of thermal signatures gathered in one of the larger hidden rooms, clustered together as though welcoming someone new. One signature, slightly brighter than the others. Daniel's body temperature, still warm, still living, stands in the center of the group. Harrison and associates received an anonymous email 3 days after Daniel's disappearance. It came from an untraceable address and contained a single sentence. The hidden floor found him more interesting than he found it. He'll make an excellent addition to the collection. Thank you for sending him to us. Michael Harrison closed the Mar-a-Lago file permanently. The final structural report listed the building as compliant with all safety codes with no mention of measurement discrepancies or missing vertical space. Daniel Kovacs was declared a missing person. His wife told police he'd been acting strangely, obsessing over a work project, but she didn't know the details. The thermal imaging equipment in his abandoned bags was examined by police. The memory cards had been wiped clean, except for that final footage, almost as though something wanted that specific evidence to be found, wanted people to know that the hidden floor existed and was occupied. On the night of each new moon, security staff at Mar-a-Lago report hearing sounds from above the third-floor ceiling. Footsteps, conversations, sometimes music, big band era, 1940s jazz. And occasionally, very faintly, someone calling for help in a voice that sounds remarkably like Daniel Kovacs. Echoing from a place that can't be reached, can't be accessed, can't even be proven to exist. The hidden floor remains patient and hungry, waiting for the next person curious enough to look for it. And the collection continues to grow. The staff who work at Mar-a-Lago long-term share a particular look of guardedness in their eyes, a careful way of choosing words when certain topics arise. Turnover is high among new employees, but those who stay beyond a year develop an unspoken understanding. They know things guests never see, experience things that aren't discussed in employee meetings or mentioned in incident reports. They learn to navigate the mansion's peculiarities, to recognize warning signs, to protect themselves from something that has no official name. In 2009, investigative journalist Rebecca Morrow began researching Mar-a-Lago's history for a piece about historic Palm Beach estates. She spent months trying to interview current and former staff members, most of whom politely declined or gave scripted responses about the property's beauty and prestige. But eventually, she befriended Carmen Rodriguez, a housekeeper who'd worked at Mar-a-Lago for 15 years. After months of casual conversations and carefully built trust, Carmen finally agreed to talk off the record. In her own home, with all recording devices turned off, what Carmen shared that evening painted a picture of a workplace where the impossible had become routine, where staff had developed their own folklore and survival strategies for dealing with phenomena management refused to acknowledge. "There's a portrait," Carmen began, her voice barely above a whisper, "in the private wing, not where guests go. It's Marjorie Merriweather Post, painted sometime in the 1930s. Beautiful work, very formal. She's wearing a green dress, standing in what looks like the gold ballroom." But the portrait changes. Rebecca started to interrupt with the obvious explanation. Different lighting, tricks of perception, but Carmen held up her hand. "I know how it sounds. We all thought the same thing at first. But it's not lighting or imagination." Her expression physically changes. Some mornings she looks serene, almost peaceful. Other days she looks angry, with this edge to her smile that makes your skin crawl. And some days, Carmen paused, struggling with how to articulate it. Some days, she looks hungry. It's the only word for it. Predatory. The housekeeping staff had started documenting it around 2006. Carmen explained after one too many arguments about whether they were all losing their minds. They began taking photos of the portrait on their cell phones, comparing images, keeping digital records. The changes were undeniable. Same portrait, same frame, same location, but Marjorie's painted face shifted expressions like a living person cycling through moods. "We have hundreds of photos now," Carmen said. "If we don't show them to management, they'd think we're crazy, or making it up, or trying to cause problems. But we know what we see. And the really disturbing part. The portrait's expression seems to correspond with other things happening in the house. When she looks peaceful, the building is quiet. No incidents, no strange sounds, nothing unusual. When she looks angry, that's when doors open by themselves, when the cold spots appear, when people report feeling watched, and when she looks hungry." Carmen's voice dropped even lower. That's when guests disappear. Rebecca pressed for clarification. Carmen explained that disappear didn't always mean physically vanishing like Richard Whitmore, though that had happened more often. It meant guests checking out early, leaving in the middle of the night, refusing to explain why they were suddenly terrified of their rooms. Or it meant guests who completed their stay but seemed diminished, somehow exhausted, confused, complaining of nightmares they couldn't quite remember, feeling as though they'd forgotten something important, but unable to identify what. "The house feeds on people," Carmen said flatly. "I know that sounds insane, but those of us who've been here long enough, we've seen the pattern. When the portrait shows her looking hungry, within a day or two, someone checks out early. They look drained, like they aged 5 years overnight. And the portrait changes back to peaceful, like it's satisfied. We call it the collection. The mansion collects people, not always their bodies, but pieces of them. Memories, energy, something vital. And Marjorie or whatever's wearing her face in that painting oversees it. But the portrait wasn't the only phenomenon staff dealt with. Carmen described the singing a woman's voice that echoed through the mansion during certain lunar phases. Always at night, always the same Spanish hymn. Multiple staff members had heard it over the years, independent of each other, sometimes simultaneously in different parts of the building. One of the maintenance workers, Jose Delgado, spoke Spanish fluently. He'd translated the lyrics for the housekeeping staff, and the translation had made Carmen's blood run cold. La casa recuerda, todo. A casa, guarda, a todos. Ca, ga, ca. Ca, ca, ca. Cuando tejes ido, y serás part de su memoria. The house remembers everything. The house keeps everyone. It'll stand when you are gone, and you will be part of its memory. The song always lasted exactly 7 minutes, Carmen said, starting at different times, but always maintaining that precise duration. Staff had timed it repeatedly. It began softly, almost pleasant, then grew in intensity, the voice multiplying as though a choir were joining in dozens of voices singing in harmony, though no one was ever visible. The singing always originated from the sealed basement, the area where Marjorie's archive had been, where contractors had poured concrete during the 1985 renovations. You can hear it most clearly near the floor vents, Carmen explained, like it's rising from below, from somewhere deep in the foundation. And it's not a recording. We've tried to record it ourselves, but nothing picks up on phones or cameras. It's only audible to people who are physically present in the building. Rebecca asked if Carmen had reported any of this to management. Ack. Carmen's laugh was bitter. We tried years ago. Different staff members, different incidents. Management's response is always the same. We're overworked, stressed, imagining things. One housekeeper who was particularly insistent about what she'd seen was let go for unrelated performance issues. After that, we learned to keep quiet. We handle it ourselves. The staff had developed their own rules. Carmen said no official protocols passed from veteran employees to newcomers. Never written down, never officially acknowledged. Never work alone after sunset. Always travel in pairs through the private wings. Avoid the third floor east wing entirely during new moons. Don't look into mirrors for too long. If you hear your name called but can't identify who's calling, don't respond. If you feel watched, don't turn around quickly. Move slowly, deliberately, as though you've noticed nothing unusual. We protect the new employees, Carmen said, the ones who don't know yet. We assign them to safe areas, daytime shifts, keep them away from the worst spots, until they've been here long enough to handle the truth. Some people quit in the first month. They sense something wrong, even if they can't articulate it. The ones who stay longer start to understand, and the ones who make it past a year. We look out for each other. We're like survivors of something no one else believes happened. Carmen described an incident from 2007 that solidified the staff's underground support network. A new housekeeper, a young woman named Alicia, was assigned to clean suite 347, the room where Richard Whitmore had vanished. It was still officially closed for renovation, but management occasionally had it cleaned to prevent deterioration. Alicia was told it was routine maintenance, nothing unusual. She entered the room at 2 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. When she didn't emerge by 3:30 p.m., Carmen went to check on her. She found Alicia sitting on the floor, back against the wall, staring at nothing, tears streaming down her face. She was whispering the same phrase over and over in Spanish. They're all still here. They're all still here. Carmen and another housekeeper got Alicia out of the room, took her to the break area, tried to calm her down. Eventually, Alicia was able to explain what happened. While she was cleaning, she'd heard knocking not from the door, but from inside the walls. Multiple sources, different rhythms, like dozens of people trapped in the structure itself, all knocking to get out. Then she'd heard voices, whispering her name, telling her they were lonely, asking her to stay, promising they'd take care of her if she'd just lay down on the bed and went to sleep. She said the room felt wrong, Carmen told Rebecca. Like it existed in two places at once, and she was seeing both versions overlapping. She saw other people in the room with her, transparent like ghosts, but aware, watching her clean. And they were reaching for her, trying to touch her, getting closer every time she blinked. Alicia quit that day and left Palm Beach entirely. But before she left, she warned Carmen, that room is a mouth. The whole house is full of mouths, opening and closing, trying to swallow people, and whatever's controlling it is getting stronger. I could feel it, this massive presence underneath everything, this intelligence that's been growing for decades. It's patient, it's careful, and it's almost ready. After that incident, the housekeeping staff made a collective decision. They would protect each other by sharing information, warning about dangerous areas, reporting their experiences to each other, even if management wouldn't listen. They started keeping a hidden journal, a shared notebook kept in a locked cabinet in the employee break room where staff could document incidents. The journal filled up quickly. Unexplained cold spots, voices in empty rooms, objects moving, the sensation of invisible hands touching shoulders or hair, the overwhelming feeling of being watched by something that didn't breathe. The journal is our insurance, Carmen said. If something happens to one of us, the others will know about it. We're witnesses for each other. And maybe someday, if enough of us speak up, someone will finally listen. Carmen had more to share, but as the evening grew later, she became increasingly nervous. She kept glancing at her windows, checking her phone, growing visibly agitated. Finally, she admitted what was frightening her. We believe the house knows when we talk about it. Not in some metaphorical way, we think it actually knows, like it's listening all the time. Staff who've spoken to openly about what they've experienced. Bad things happen to them. Not immediately, not obviously, but within weeks. They have accidents. They fall downstairs, they've climbed 1,000 times. They cut themselves on equipment they've used safely for years. One man had a heart attack at 42, no history of heart problems. The house protects itself. Rebecca left Carmen's home that night with pages of notes, but no recording, no proof, nothing that could be verified. When her article about Palm Beach estates was published months later, the Mar-a-Lago section was brief, focusing on architecture and history, making no mention of staff experiences or supernatural phenomena. Her editor had cut those sections, calling them unsubstantiated and potentially litigious. But Rebecca kept her notes. She noticed something in the years that followed. Carmen Rodriguez stopped working at Mar-a-Lago in 2010, officially retiring after 16 years of service. She moved to Georgia to be near her daughter. In 2012, she died in a house fire ruled accidental. The fire started in her bedroom at 3:17 a.m., exact time when doors at Mar-a-Lago had been documented opening simultaneously. The time when the hidden floor's thermal signatures showed the most activity. Employee journal Carmen mentioned was never found. New staff members at Mar-a-Lago still report strange occurrences, still develop that haunted look in their eyes, still whisper warnings to each other about which rooms to avoid and when. And in the private wing, Marjorie Merriweather Post's portrait continues to change her painted eyes, watching everyone who passes. Her expression shifting with the house's hunger, her smile growing wider as the collection grows piece by piece, soul by soul, year after year. The staff know the truth, even if no one believes them. They don't work for Mar-a-Lago. They work inside something that's alive, conscious, and feeding. And every day they survive is a small victory against something that has infinite patience and an endless appetite. The last decade, something fundamental has changed at Mar-a-Lago. Staff members who worked there in the 1990s and early 2000s described the building's presence as watchful, patient, slowly gathering strength. But those who've worked there since 2015 use different words: aggressive, demanding, urgent. It's as though whatever inhabits the mansion has reached some critical threshold, and can no longer maintain its careful subtlety. The incidents have intensified in frequency and boldness, affecting not just guests and staff, but the very people assigned to protect the property. Secret Service agents, trained to handle threats ranging from assassins to terrorists, found themselves confronting something their training hadn't prepared them for. The first official report came in November 2016, filed by Agent Marcus Webb, 12-year veteran with multiple presidential protection details on his record. His incident report, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request years later with heavy redactions, described what he called a mass hallucination event in the gold and white ballroom. Webb and his partner, Agent Lisa Chen, were conducting a routine security sweep at 2:30 a.m. when they entered the ballroom. Both agents immediately saw the same thing. The room was filled with people, hundreds of them, dressed in formal attire from different eras: 1920s flapper dresses mixed with 1950s tuxedos. Victorian gowns, alongside 1980s evening wear. They were dancing, but in complete silence. No music, no footsteps, no rustling of fabric. Just the visual spectacle of a crowded ballroom moving in perfect choreography to music that didn't exist. The figures were transparent, Webb's report stated, but detailed enough to observe facial features, jewelry, and specific clothing patterns. They moved with fluid precision, as though following a waltz rhythm. Neither Agent Chen nor I felt immediately threatened, but both experienced significant psychological distress at witnessing a shared hallucination of this magnitude. The report continued with the detail that changed everything. After approximately 45 seconds of observation, the figures began to turn their heads toward our position. Not all at once, but in a wave, the dancers nearest to us first. Then those farther away, one by one, until hundreds of faces were oriented in our direction. The figures' expressions were not hostile but intensely focused, as though we were the most interesting thing they had encountered in a very long time. We maintained position for an additional 30 seconds, then departed the ballroom per established protocols. Both agents were examined by medical personnel and evaluated by psychological services. No drugs or contaminants were found in their systems. No environmental factors, gas leaks, electromagnetic interference, infrasound could explain the shared experience. The incident was classified as unexplained, but non-threatening, and filed away. But internally, the Secret Service changed their protocols. No agent patrols the gold and white ballroom alone after midnight. What Webb's official report didn't include but what he told his supervisor in an unrecorded conversation was what happened in those final 30 seconds before they left. The transparent figures didn't just watch. Some of them smiled, and a woman in the front of the crowd, wearing a green 1930s dress that both agents later identified from photographs as identical to one owned by Marjorie. Merriweather Post mouthed words at them. Agent Chen, who read lips as part of her training, interpreted the message. Stay. Dance with us. We're so lonely, and you're so warm. That incident was just the beginning. Over the next 3 years, more than 30 Secret Service agents filed incident reports describing anomalous experiences at Mar-a-Lago. The reports were consistent enough to establish patterns, troubling enough that the service's Threat Assessment Division began treating the building itself as a potential security concern. Agents reported cold spots that moved into stationary areas of low temperature, but zones of intense cold that drifted through hallways following agents as they walked. Multiple agents described the sensation of invisible hands touching their shoulders or backs, always when they were alone, always accompanied by a drop in temperature of 15 to 20 degrees within a radius of a few feet. The audio phenomena were particularly disturbing. In 2017, the Secret Service upgraded Mar-a-Lago's security system, installing state-of-the-art surveillance equipment, including high-sensitivity audio sensors throughout the property. The system was designed to detect whispered conversations, identify threats, and provide comprehensive monitoring of all public and private spaces. Within a month, the monitoring center staff requested the audio sensors be disabled or recalibrated. The sensors were picking up sounds that shouldn't exist, conversations in rooms verified to be empty, footsteps on floors where no one was walking, and most disturbing, breathing. Dozens of sources of slow, rhythmic breathing detected throughout the building, sometimes clustered in groups, sometimes isolated in single rooms. Agent David Park, assigned to monitor the security feeds, documented a pattern that appeared over 3 consecutive nights in March 2018. At exactly 3:17 a.m. each night, every audio sensor in the building detected a sound simultaneously, a collective intake of breath, as though the entire mansion was inhaling. The sound lasted for 12 seconds, then silence for 12 seconds, then an exhale. The pattern repeated 3 times, then stopped. The breathing sounds came from everywhere: sealed rooms, empty corridors, inside walls, even from the concrete-filled basement. The technical team analyzed the recordings, assuming equipment malfunction. But the audio signatures were genuine actual sound waves, not electronic artifacts. And they weren't random noise. They showed the precise characteristics of biological breathing, the slight whistle of air through passages, the subtle variation in rhythm that indicates living respiration, even the soft sounds of lungs expanding and contracting. It's like the building itself is breathing, Park wrote in his report. Or like there are hundreds of people hidden throughout the structure, all breathing in perfect synchronization, all waiting for something. The most alarming incident occurred in August 2019, during a period when enhanced security measures were in place. The upgraded system included motion-activated cameras with infrared capabilities designed to capture any movement throughout the property. On August 23rd, at 3:17 a.m., that recurring time again, every camera in the building triggered simultaneously. The security team reviewed the footage, expecting to find evidence of a coordinated intrusion or system malfunction. Instead, they found something that led to an immediate classified briefing with senior Secret Service officials. Every camera had captured the same thing: all the doors in Mar-a-Lago opening at once. Not slowly, not violently, but deliberately. Every door in every hallway, every suite, every closet, every entrance, 138 doors by official counts, swung open in perfect unison, moved by no visible force. They opened to exactly 90 degrees, held that position for exactly 2 minutes, then closed again with the same synchronized precision. The cameras caught it from dozens of angles. There was no question about what happened. The only question was why. During those 2 minutes while the doors stood open, the audio sensors picked up something extraordinary. The sounds began as whisper, soft, indistinct murmuring from multiple locations. Within seconds, the whispers multiplied, growing in number and volume until the audio feeds were overwhelmed with overlapping voices. The monitoring center staff described it as listening to a crowd of hundreds, all speaking at once, all saying something urgently important, but impossible to understand because of the cacophony. Agent Sarah Mitchell, who was on duty in the monitoring center that night, made the mistake of putting on headphones to try to isolate individual voices. She managed 3 seconds before ripping the headphones off, visibly shaken. She refused to describe exactly what she'd heard, but she filed a formal request for transfer the next day and left the Mar-a-Lago detail within a week. Another agent, who spoke Spanish, later reviewed the audio recordings using sound isolation software. He managed to extract fragments of the overlapping conversations. His report, heavily redacted, included partial translations. Almost strong enough now, as the collection is nearly complete. She's learning to reach beyond the walls. When the doors open, the boundaries weaken. Soon we won't need the house to hold us. The recordings were analyzed by linguistic experts, audio forensic specialists, and eventually consultants with backgrounds in historical languages and religious studies. One consultant, whose name was redacted from all documentation, provided an assessment that was classified immediately upon receipt. The vocal patterns matched descriptions of medieval Spanish liturgical chanting, specifically funerary rites used by monastic orders in the 16th century. The voices are saying the same prayers that were allegedly being recited when the Monasterio de las Almas Perdidas burned in. This suggests either an extraordinarily elaborate hoax with access to obscure historical research, or something far more disturbing that I am not qualified to explain. Following this incident, the Secret Service made an unprecedented decision. They disabled the audio sensors in specific areas of Mar-a-Lago, officially due to technical difficulties producing false positives. The visual surveillance system remained active, but agents were instructed to treat certain phenomena as expected environmental anomalies rather than security threats. A leaked internal memo from 2020, never officially acknowledged, laid out new protocols. Personnel should be aware that Mar-a-Lago exhibits environmental irregularities that may include unexplained sounds, visual anomalies, and equipment malfunctions. These phenomena are not considered security threats unless accompanied by confirmed hostile intent. Agents experiencing psychological distress related to these irregularities should report to medical services for evaluation and possible reassignment. The memo's language was carefully neutral, but its implications were clear. The Secret Service had officially acknowledged that something was wrong with Mar-a-Lago, something they couldn't explain or control, something they could only document and try to work around. Current and former agents speak about Mar-a-Lago in hushed tones when they speak about it at all. They describe a building that seems aware of their presence, that responds to their routines, that tests their psychological resilience. Several agents have reported identical dreams after working there, walking through endless corridors that shift and multiply, searching for an exit that recedes further with each step, pursued by something invisible that breathes against the back of their necks. "You can feel it watching you," one agent told his therapist during a mandatory psychological evaluation. Not hostile exactly, more like curious, hungry, like it's trying to decide if you're worth collecting. The longer you're there, the more it takes interest in you. Some guys can handle it. Others can't sleep anymore, can't shake the feeling that they left something important behind in that house, some piece of themselves that got absorbed into the walls. The Secret Service continues to maintain protection details at Mar-a-Lago when required, but assignment rotation is now more frequent than at any other protected location. No agent spends more than 3 consecutive months there. The official reason is operational security and personnel management. The unofficial reason, known to everyone in the service, much longer than 3 months, and agents start to change. They become distant, distracted, as though part of their attention is always elsewhere. They report feeling incomplete when away from the property, as though they've left something behind that they need to retrieve. 3 former agents have requested permission to return to Mar-a-Lago after retirement, claiming they forgot something important during their service there. All 3 requests were denied. One of them, Agent Thomas Riley, visited Palm Beach anyway in 2021 against explicit instructions. He was found the next morning standing outside Mar-a-Lago's gates at dawn, unable to explain how he'd gotten there or what he was waiting for. He was placed under psychiatric observation and diagnosed with location-specific compulsive disorder, a condition that, according to psychiatrists, doesn't officially exist. The incidents continue, growing bolder, more frequent, more difficult to rationalize away. The Secret Service maintains its protective mission, but internally, agents understand they're not just guarding a building. They're guarding something that's awake, aware, and increasingly impatient. Something that's been preparing for almost a century. Something that's finally almost ready to stop hiding what it truly is. And every agent who's worked there long enough can feel it. The house is counting down to something. The doors opening in unison wasn't a malfunction or a haunting, it was practice. The house is learning to open more than just doors. Mar-a-Lago stands today, as it has for nearly a century, pristine limestone walls, red-tiled roofs, palm trees swaying in the Atlantic breeze. From the outside, it remains one of Palm Beach's most iconic properties, hosting events, welcoming guests, maintaining its reputation as a symbol of wealth and power. But those who know its complete history, who've pieced together the fragments of testimony from staff, agents, investigators, and the disappeared, understand that something profound and terrible has changed. The mansion is no longer simply haunted. It has become something else entirely. All the darkness it has absorbed over 100 years, the deaths during construction, Marjorie's obsessive collection of cursed objects, the government's failed containment, the vanished guests, the mysterious basement, the hidden floor, the 47 monks who burned in 1582, has reached a critical mass. The house is no longer passive. It's active, purposeful, and aware. In the past 5 years, a disturbing pattern has emerged among people who stay at Mar-a-Lago. Different guests, different rooms, different backgrounds, but they report identical nightmares. The dreams always begin the same way, walking through Mar-a-Lago's corridors, but wrong. The hallways stretch impossibly long, multiplying and branching like blood vessels. The wallpaper appears older with each turn, peeling and stained, revealing layers underneath that show different eras of decoration, reaching back through decades, then centuries. In these dreams, guests search desperately for an exit. They try doors, but each one opens to another corridor, another room, another impossible space. The architecture defies logic: staircases that climb to nowhere, windows that show different views simultaneously, rooms that are larger inside than the entire building should contain. And throughout the dream, they're being followed by something they can't quite see. Something that breathes heavily in the darkness behind them, getting closer with each failed attempt to escape. Eventually, they encounter her. Marjorie Merriweather Post, but fundamentally wrong. Her smile stretches too wide, showing too many teeth. Her eyes are black from edge to edge, reflecting nothing. She moves with an unnatural fluidity, as though her joints bend in directions human anatomy doesn't allow. And she always says the same thing, in a voice that sounds like dozens of people speaking in unison. "Thank you for coming. The house was so hungry." But don't worry, you're not alone here. You'll never be alone again. The dreamers wake in their rooms, disoriented and terrified. But the nightmare doesn't end. They report a persistent feeling that they've left something behind in the dream, some essential part of themselves that's still trapped in those endless corridors. The sensation grows stronger over days and weeks, a hollow feeling. It's like missing a memory they can't quite recall, or forgetting a face they once knew intimately. Psychiatrists have documented this phenomenon in at least 43 individuals who stayed at Mar-a-Lago between 2019 and 2024. They call it post-visitation dissociative syndrome, a condition characterized by persistent depersonalization, memory gaps, chronic fatigue, and an overwhelming compulsion to return to the location where symptoms began. Several patients have described it as feeling like a photocopy of myself. It's like the original stayed behind and I'm just the impression it left. 3 of these patients have committed suicide. Their notes, remarkably similar, described an unbearable sensation of incompleteness, of being slowly erased, of existing in 2 places simultaneously but experiencing neither fully. One note read, "I'm still there. I can feel myself still walking those corridors, still searching for a way out, even while I'm here writing this. I can't live split like this anymore. If this version of me dies, the version that's trapped will become whole again." The most disturbing evidence emerged in late 2023 from an unlikely source, an urban exploration video posted to an obscure forum. The uploader, using the handle Nightwalker87, claimed to have accessed Mar-a-Lago's sealed basement through a maintenance tunnel system. The video is shaky, filmed on what appears to be a phone with a dying battery, the timestamp showing 3:47 a.m. on October 31st, 2023. The footage begins in darkness. The camera's light revealing concrete walls and exposed pipes. A male voice whispers commentary, "I've been researching this place for 2 years. The sealed basement, the archive room, all the disappearances. I found building plans from 1925 that show a maintenance access that was unfilled in during the 1985 renovation. I think I can get to the room where they sealed everything." The video shows him navigating narrow passages, occasionally stopping to check hand-drawn maps. After approximately 8 minutes, he reaches a section where newer concrete is visible, the seal created in 1985, but there's a crack. A fissure running through the concrete from floor to ceiling, wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "This wasn't here on any photos I've seen," the voice says, confused. "This is recent." Like something broke through from the inside, he slips through the crack. The camera light reveals a large room beyond the old archive. It's not empty. Everything Marjorie collected is there, arranged exactly as Eleanor Hartwick described it in her journals from the 1930s. The funeral masks cover the walls in their unsettling patterns. The cursed mirror stands in its silver frame, its reflection showing the room but subtly wrong shadows in different positions, objects that aren't physically present. The paintings hang in their designated spots, faces rendered in oils that seem too liquid, too alive. "Oh God," the voice whispers. "It's all here. How's it all here? They sealed this room 40 years ago." The camera pans across the collection, capturing details. A mask whose expression seems different from one moment to the next. A painting whose subject's eyes track the camera's movement. The mirror's reflection showing a figure standing in the room, even though the explorer is alone. Then the camera focuses on the center of the room. Something is there that shouldn't be a woman, standing completely still, dressed in clothing from the 1920s. She faces the camera directly, her posture rigid, her hands at her sides. The camera zooms in slowly and the image quality degrades, as though the phone is struggling to process what it's recording. Her face is Marjorie Merriweather Post's face, but but rendered with an uncanny precision that suggests it's not a person but something wearing a person's appearance, like a mask. Her skin has a waxy quality, too smooth, too perfect. Her eyes don't blink. She doesn't breathe. But as the camera focuses on her face, her mouth slowly opens wider than a human mouth should open, revealing darkness inside. Absolute darkness, with no visible tongue or teeth or throat, just an impossible void. And from that darkness comes a voice. It's not from her throat, but from everywhere: the walls, the floor, the artifacts themselves, all speaking simultaneously in perfect harmony. The collection is nearly complete. The house will stand for centuries, and everyone who enters becomes part of what we're building. The camera jerks violently. The explorer is running, gasping, his breath coming in panicked bursts. The footage becomes chaotic flashes of concrete walls, glimpses of that impossibly long hallway from the shared nightmares, the sensation of movement pursuing him. He's trying to speak, but can only manage broken fragments. She's not breathing. She's never been breathing. How long has she been standing there? The video cuts to black at 4:03 a.m. The final audio is the explorer's voice. Distant, echoing, as though speaking from the bottom of a well. I can't find the crack. The walls are solid. There's no way out. She's still standing there in the center of the room, and her mouth is still open, and I can hear them all now. All the voices inside her, everyone. The house is collected, and they're calling my name, and they sound so lonely, and I'm so tired. The video ends. Nightwalker87 never posted again. His account went dormant. 3 users who claimed to know him in real life reported that he was listed as missing as of November 2nd, 2023. Last seen in the Palm Beach area. His car was found abandoned near Mar-a-Lago's southern property line. His phone was never recovered. The video was analyzed by multiple sources. The metadata confirmed it was filmed in 2023, not manipulated or edited from older footage. The location data embedded in the file matched Mar-a-Lago's coordinates. Enhanced audio analysis of the final moments revealed something that caused 2 separate audio forensic specialists to refuse to work on the case further. Beneath the Explorer's voice and the woman's voice, there are hundreds of other voices all speaking at once, all saying the same thing in different languages. Welcome. Stay. Join us. We're so close now. So close to being strong enough. So close to leaving. Since that video surfaced, security at Mar-a-Lago has been enhanced around the basement area. Additional concrete was poured, steel reinforcements added, motion sensors installed. But maintenance staff report that the crack in the seal reappears periodically, always in a slightly different location, as though something is testing different weak points, searching for the way out, and the shared nightmares continue, spreading to people who've never visited Mar-a-Lago, who've only seen photographs or read about the property. They dream of endless corridors, of searching for exits that don't exist. Marjorie's impossible smile and her voice saying, "You're part of the collection now. Distance doesn't matter anymore. The house knows you. The house has always known you." Psychiatrists have no explanation for this phenomenon. How can people dream identical? Specific dreams about a location they've never visited. Some theorize mass hysteria, cultural contamination from viral stories and videos. But the dreamers report details they couldn't have learned from any public source. The specific arrangement of masks in the archive, the reflection patterns in the cursed mirror, the exact wording of the Spanish funeral hymn that Carmen Rodriguez heard decades ago. It's as though Mar-a-Lago has learned to extend beyond its physical boundaries, reaching into minds across distances, planting itself in consciousness like a seed that grows into a nightmare. The house is no longer confined to its limestone walls and red-tiled roofs. It's becoming something that exists partially in thought and memory, in shared fear, a structure anchored in reality but expanding into human consciousness. Former staff members, retired Secret Service agents, escaped guests, they all report the same progression. First comes the dream, then the feeling of incompleteness, then the compulsion to return, and finally, for some, the irresistible pull that draws them back to Palm Beach, back to the gates, back to the building that has claimed a piece of them and won't let go. The most recent incident occurred just 3 months ago. A woman named Elizabeth Morrison drove from Ohio to Palm Beach, telling her family she needed to retrieve something she'd forgotten. She'd stayed at Mar-a-Lago once for a single night in 2021 for a friend's wedding. She'd had the dream, the endless corridors, Marjorie's smile, the voice saying she was part of the collection. Security cameras captured Elizabeth at Mar-a-Lago's gates at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. She stood there for 43 minutes, not moving, not speaking, just staring at the building. Then she walked directly toward the east wing, approaching the same wall where Daniel Kovacs had disappeared in 2004. Security staff ran to intercept her, but they were too late. Elizabeth placed both hands against the wall, exactly as Kovacs had done. And just like Kovacs, she continued forward, her body seeming to merge with the solid stone, absorbing into the structure, as though the wall were liquid accepting her home. One moment she was there, the next she was gone, leaving no trace except her car in the parking lot and a note in the front seat. "I'm not disappearing, I'm returning. The part of me that stayed behind is calling to the part that left. I can feel it waiting in those corridors, lonely and incomplete. We were never meant to be separated. The house made a mistake letting me leave. It won't make that mistake again. Tell my family I'm sorry, but I was never entirely with them anyway. Part of me has been in those hallways since 2021, walking and searching, and I'm so tired of being split between two places. This isn't an ending, it's a completion. Mar-a-Lago still operates today. Events are still held there. Guests still book rooms, though certain suites remain mysteriously unavailable, always marked as under renovation on the booking system. Staff still work there, though turnover remains high. And those who stay develop that haunted, knowing look in their eyes. The mansion stands on its island, waves crashing against its walls. Waiting, patient, hungry, growing stronger with each person who stays. Each dream it plants, each piece of consciousness it collects. The 47 monks who burned in 1582 found a way back, found a woman willing to build them a home, found a method to anchor themselves to physical reality through stone and memory and the slow accumulation of human essence. They've been building themselves for a century, piece by piece, guest by guest. Using Mar-a-Lago as a vessel, as a trap, as a machine designed to capture and preserve human consciousness, and they're almost complete, almost strong enough, almost ready to stop hiding what they truly are. The house remembers everything. The house keeps everyone. And the house will stand for centuries, long after the last person who built it has been absorbed into its walls, long after the last skeptic has experienced the dream and felt the pull, long after the boundaries between the living world and whatever lies beyond have worn so thin that the difference no longer matters. Mar-a-Lago isn't haunted. Haunted implies something dead clinging to life. This is something that died centuries ago and learned to build itself a new form of existence, not life. Not death, but something in between, something patient and hungry and growing stronger every day. And it's still collecting, still reaching, still calling to people in their dreams, planting itself in their consciousness, marking them as future additions to whatever it's becoming. The mansion stands, beautiful and terrible, a monument to wealth and power and something far darker. A place where the walls between worlds have been worn transparent through decades of intention and sacrifice. A place where something ancient and patient has been building toward a moment when it will finally be strong enough to stop pretending to be just a house. That moment is coming soon. The staff can feel it. The agents know it. The dreamers sense it in their sleep. Something is reaching completion, reaching critical mass, reaching the threshold where it won't need to hide anymore. And when that moment arrives, when the collection is finally complete and the house is strong enough to fully awaken, everyone will understand what Marjorie Merriweather Post built on that island in 1927. Not a mansion, not a home, but a doorway. A permanent bridge between worlds. A place where the dead can exist again, where consciousness can anchor itself to stone and memory, where the boundaries that separate life from death, present from past, reality from nightmare, finally dissolved completely. The house is patient, the house is hungry, and the house is almost ready. Mar-a-Lago stands, waiting for the night when all 128 doors open at once and don't close again. When the hidden floor descends to merge with the floors below, when the sealed basement breaks open and releases what it was never strong enough to contain, when the collection becomes complete and something that has been building itself for 4 centuries finally finishes its work and steps fully into our world, that night is coming. The compulsion is growing stronger. And everyone who has ever stayed there, everyone who has ever dreamed of those corridors, Everyone who has felt that hollow sensation of incompleteness, they're all being called home. Because once Mar-a-Lago touches you, you're part of it forever. It's part of the collection, part of the memory. It's part of what it's building itself into. And it's building something magnificent and terrible. Something that will stand for centuries, exactly as promised, fed by the endless accumulation of human consciousness, growing stronger with each person who stays, each dream it plants, each soul it absorbs. The house will stand when we are gone, and we will all eventually become part of its memory. The mansion stands on its island, waves crashing against its walls, doors waiting to open. Something ancient and patient breathing in the darkness below, counting down to the night when it finally stops pretending to be merely a building and reveals what it has truly always been. Something alive, something hungry, something that has been preparing for a century to show the world exactly what it's capable of becoming. And that night is almost here.